The blood-red sun dipped behind the craggy mountains as Nora Miller clutched her swollen belly and stared at the dusty stranger standing on her porch with his hat in his hands. She hadn't heard anyone approach the isolated homestead, yet here he was tall, weathered, and regarding her with eyes that seemed to hold the vastness of the prairie within them. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and gentle like distant thunder. "Name's Caleb Walker. I heard your husband passed." "I'm awful sorry." Nora tightened her grip on the doorframe, her knuckles turning white. 3 months a widow, 6 months with child, and miles from civilization vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. "What business brings you to my door, Mr. Walker?" Caleb shifted his weight, dust falling from his worn boots onto her clean porch. "I've been riding fence for neighboring ranches. Word is you're out here alone." His eyes moved briefly to her rounded stomach before returning to meet her gaze. "That's no way for a woman in your condition to be." "I manage," she replied, lifting her chin despite the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. "Yes, madam, I can see that." He gestured to the fields beyond, where half-tended crops struggled against the relentless Wyoming Territory sun. "But winter's coming. That roof needs work." "Fields need tending." Nora felt a flicker of anger. "I don't recall asking for your assessment, Mr. Walker," he nodded, accepting her rebuke. Then, with a directness that stole her breath, he said the words that would change everything. "I'll be his father if you'll let me love you," the cowboy said to the pregnant widow on his porch. The year was 1878, and Nora Miller had just been offered an impossible choice. "You're a stranger," she whispered, one hand protectively covering her unborn child. "You can't just ride up and propose to a woman you've never met. I know your situation, Mrs. Miller. I know what happens to women alone out here." His eyes were earnest. "I'm offering honest work and protection." "Nothing improper, and love?" she asked, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "You speak of that so easily." "No, madam, not easily, but truthfully." He replaced his hat, the brim shadowing his face. "I'll be back tomorrow with supplies. You can give me your answer then." As he mounted his horse, Nora called out, Why would you do this?" Caleb paused, his silhouette stark against the darkening sky. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Mrs. Miller, even me." With that, he rode away, leaving Nora with questions that followed her into restless dreams. Morning came with the distant sound of hammering. Nora struggled out of bed, her back aching from the weight of the baby. Through the window, she saw Caleb Walker already at work on her roof. She hadn't given him permission, hadn't even given him an answer, yet there he was. She dressed quickly and stepped outside. "Mr. Walker," she called up, "I don't recall inviting you to fix my roof." Caleb looked down, wiping sweat from his brow. "Roof won't fix itself, Mrs. Miller. Storm coming soon." He continued hammering as if the matter was settled. "You can't just—" Nora began, then stopped as she noticed the wagon laden with supplies, food, lumber, tools, things she desperately needed but couldn't afford. "I can't pay you, not asking for payment." He paused his work. "Though coffee would be welcome if you're offering." Reluctantly, Nora nodded and returned inside to stoke the stove. As she prepared coffee, she watched through the window as Caleb worked methodically, expertly. She wondered what kind of man makes such an offer to a stranger. A desperate one, a kind one, or someone with secrets of his own. When she brought the coffee out, he climbed down, removing his hat as he accepted the cup. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 to her 24 years, with lines around his eyes that spoke of hardship rather than age. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller." "Nora," she said suddenly, surprising herself, "if you're going to be on my roof, you might as well use my name." A smile crept across his face, transforming his features. "Nora," he repeated, as if testing the feel of it. "That's a fine name." They stood in awkward silence until Nora gestured to the wagon. "You brought quite a lot. Figured whatever you didn't need we could trade in town." The word hung between them, weighty with implication. "Figure of speech," he said quickly, respecting the boundaries she'd established. "Your homestead, your decisions." Nora studied him. "Where are you from, Mr. Walker?" "Texas originally, been drifting since the war." He sipped his coffee. "And it's Caleb, please. You fought?" "Yes, madam, Confederate cavalry." He said it without pride or shame, simply stating a fact. Nora nodded. Her late husband Thomas had fought for the Union, but that conflict seemed distant now, buried under more immediate concerns. And after cattle drives, ranch work, whatever honest labor I could find, he met her eyes directly. No bounties on my head if that's your worry. It wasn't, she lied, then changed the subject. I need to fetch water, the well's running low. I'll get it, he offered, finishing his coffee and handing back the cup. You should rest. I'm with child, Mr. Walker, not invalid, she said, though her aching back suggested otherwise. His expression softened. Never suggested you were, but accepting help doesn't make you weak. Before she could argue, he'd collected the water buckets and headed toward the well. Nora watched him go, conflicted. Thomas had been dead only 3 months, taken by a fever that swept through the territory. She'd mourned him bitterly, not just for the loss of companionship, but for the future they'd planned. Now a stranger was offering to step into that void. It felt disloyal. It felt necessary. It felt terrifying. Throughout the day, Caleb worked tirelessly. He repaired the roof, chopped firewood, and began mending the corral fence. Nora prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, and when she called him in to eat, he washed up thoroughly before sitting at her table. How far along are you? He asked as they ate, 6 months thereabouts. She pushed the food around her plate. Due when winter's at its worst. Hard time to birth a child. Any time is hard without a doctor nearby, she replied. The nearest town with a proper doctor was 20 miles away. Caleb nodded thoughtfully. Mrs. Johnson over at Pine Creek Ranch was a midwife back east. I could ask if she'd be willing to come when your time nears. Nora looked up in surprise. You do that, of course. He seemed puzzled by her question. Child needs a healthy mother. They ate in silence for a while before Nora gathered her courage. About what you said yesterday. Caleb set down his fork. I meant it, every word. You don't know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know you're strong, I know you're proud, I know you're afraid, though you hide it well. His perception unsettled her. And what do I know of you, that you're handy with repairs and speak plainly? That's hardly enough to build a life on. Fair point. He leaned back in his chair. What would you like to know? Nora considered the question. Why aren't you already married? A man with your capabilities, a shadow crossed his face, was once Emily. She died in childbirth, the baby too. I'm sorry, Nora whispered, understanding his interest in her situation with sudden clarity. It was 5 years ago. His voice was steady, but his hands had tightened around his cup. I wasn't there when it happened, was on a cattle drive by the time I got word. He trailed off, then continued more firmly, swore I'd never put another woman through that alone. The honesty of his answer touched her. I still don't understand why me, specifically. Heard about your situation from the general store owner in town. He mentioned you refused to leave the homestead despite. He gestured to her condition. Admired your determination, figured you might accept help if it came with respect. And the offer of marriage, his eyes met hers steadily. Practical solution, you need support, child needs a father. He hesitated. I've been alone a long while. Not the most romantic proposal, Nora observed, trying to lighten the mood. Caleb actually chuckled. No, madam, I suppose not. But I believe in speaking truth. Romance can come later if you're amenable. The casual way he spoke of future possibilities made her heart flutter unexpectedly. I need time, she said finally. This isn't a decision to make hastily. Understood. He stood and collected his hat. I'll be back tomorrow to finish the corral if that's all right. Yes, she found herself saying. That would be helpful. Caleb nodded and headed toward the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. One more thing you should know about me, Nora. I keep my promises. If I say I'll care for you and the child, I will, with everything I have. After he left, Nora sat alone in the growing darkness. Thomas had been gone such a short time, yet the loneliness felt eternal. She placed her hands on her swollen belly, feeling the baby shift within her. What do you think, little one? She whispered. Could we trust him? The baby kicked in response, and Nora smiled sadly. No answers would come easily, but for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt a flicker of hope. True to his word, Caleb returned the next day and the next. Each morning he arrived with the sun, worked throughout the day, and departed as evening fell. He never presumed to stay the night, maintaining a respectful distance while steadily improving the homestead. A week passed this way. Nora found herself watching the horizon each morning, waiting for the sight of his approaching horse. They settled into a rhythm. She would cook midday meals. He would share stories of his travels, and gradually, the tension between them eased. On the 8th day, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Caleb worked faster, racing to finish the barn repairs before the storm hit. "You should head back," Nora called to him as the wind picked up. "Beat the rain," he shook his head, "and leave you with a half-fixed barn. That roof will leak sure as shooting." "I've weathered storms before." "No doubt," he hammered another nail into place, "but you don't have to weather this one alone." The rain began as a gentle patter, then quickly became a downpour. They rushed inside, both soaked despite their hurry. Nora built up the fire while Caleb removed his wet coat and hung it by the door. "Looks like you'll be staying until it passes," she said, suddenly aware of how small her cabin felt with his presence filling it. "If that's all right," he replied, keeping a respectful distance. Thunder boomed, making the windows rattle. The baby kicked forcefully and Nora gasped, placing a hand on her stomach. "Everything okay?" Caleb asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yes, the baby doesn't care for thunder." She smiled, then winced as another powerful kick came. "May I?" Caleb asked hesitantly, gesturing toward her belly. After a moment's pause, Nora nodded. Caleb approached slowly and placed his large, calloused hand on her stomach. When the baby kicked against his palm, his face lit up with wonder. "Strong," he murmured. "Like his father," Nora said softly, then bit her lip. It was the first time she'd spoken of Thomas since Caleb's arrival. "Tell me about him," Caleb said, moving back to give her space. "If you want to." Nora hesitated, then found herself wanting to share. Thomas was a dreamer, saw possibility in everything. When others looked at this land and saw hardship, he saw a future. She gazed around the small cabin. "He built this place with his hands and his hope." "He chose well," Caleb said, "both the land and the woman to share it with. We were young when we married. I was 18, fresh from my parents' home in Illinois. Thomas promised me adventure." She smiled at the memory. "He certainly delivered on that promise." "How did you meet?" "My father owned a dry goods store. Thomas came in for supplies, kept finding reasons to return." The familiar pain of loss mingled with the sweetness of remembrance. "He courted me for nearly a year before proposing. A patient man. He said I was worth waiting for." She brushed away a tear. "The fever took him so quickly, 3 days from first symptom to the end." "I still can't believe it sometimes." Caleb nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Grief plays tricks that way. Some mornings I still reach for Emily before remembering she's gone." The shared experience of loss created a bridge between them. They talked through the evening, the storm raging outside while they exchanged stories of their pasts. Nora learned that Caleb had been riding with a cattle outfit since losing his wife, never staying in one place too long. He spoke of Texas, of the war, of drives up to Kansas and Nebraska. "What made you stay in Wyoming Territory?" she asked as the fire burned low. Truthfully, he looked into the flames. "I was tired of moving, tired of being no one and nowhere." He met her eyes. "Then I heard about you, thought maybe there was purpose in that." The storm continued well into the night. Eventually, Nora offered Caleb a blanket to sleep on the floor near the fire. As she lay in her bed, listening to his steady breathing, she realized something had shifted between them. The stranger on her porch had become someone she trusted, someone whose presence brought comfort rather than fear. Morning brought clear skies and decisions to be made. Caleb stood on the porch, hat in hand, as Nora leaned against the doorframe. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said, her heart racing. "I have conditions." "Name them," he replied, his expression serious. "First, we wait until after the baby comes. I want to enter this clear-headed, not pushed by desperation." Caleb nodded. "Reasonable." "Second, we marry in name only at first. I need time." "Of course." He showed no disappointment, only understanding. "Third, if either of us decides this isn't working, we find a civilized way to end it." "Agreed." Nora took a deep breath. "Then yes, I accept your offer, Caleb Walker." Relief and happiness washed over his features. "You won't regret it, Nora, I promise you that." I expect not, she said, offering a small smile. Now I believe there's a chicken coop that needs mending. Caleb grinned, replacing his hat. Yes, madam, right away. Word of their arrangement spread quickly through the scattered homesteads and ranches. Some neighbors approved of the practical solution, others whispered about impropriety. Nora found she cared little for their opinions. The homestead was thriving under Caleb's care, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt secure about facing the coming winter. As October turned to November, the first snow dusted the mountains. Caleb moved into the small bunkhouse attached to the barn, close enough to help if needed but maintaining the boundaries Nora had established. Each day brought them closer, their conversations deeper, their comfort with each other growing naturally. One crisp morning, Nora watched from the window as Caleb worked with the horses in the corral. His movements were fluid and confident, his manner gentle yet firm with the animals. Something warm unfurled in her chest at the sight. She was startled from her thoughts by a sharp pain in her abdomen. Gasping, she grabbed the table for support as a second pain followed. It was too early, she thought frantically. The baby wasn't due for at least another month. Caleb, she called, but her voice was weak with fear. The pain intensified and Nora sank to her knees, clutching her stomach. Caleb. She tried again, louder this time. Whether he heard her or simply sensed something was wrong, Caleb appeared in the doorway moments later. Seeing her on the floor, he rushed to her side. The baby, she gasped. Something's wrong. Without hesitation, Caleb lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed. I'll fetch Mrs. Johnson, he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. You hold on, Nora. Don't leave, she pleaded, gripping his hand. I have to get help. He squeezed her fingers gently. I'll be back before you know it. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and fear for Nora. Caleb returned with Mrs. Johnson, a stern-faced woman with capable hands and a no-nonsense manner. She examined Nora while Caleb waited outside. False labor, Mrs. Johnson announced finally. Body's practicing, but the baby's staying put for now. She mixed a tea of herbs and instructed Nora to rest. Complete bed rest for at least a week. That child needs more time. After Mrs. Johnson left, Caleb entered the bedroom cautiously. How are you feeling? Foolish, Nora admitted. Causing such a fuss over nothing. Not nothing. He sat on the edge of the bed. You were scared, I was scared too. His admission surprised her. You didn't seem it. Years of cattle drives teach a man to hide fear. Cows smell it on you. He attempted a smile. I've never been so terrified as when I saw you on that floor. Nora felt tears well up. I'm sorry. Don't be. He tentatively took her hand. Nora, when I thought something might happen to you or the baby, he struggled for words. I realized how much you both mean to me already. She looked at their joined hands. It's happening so fast. Too fast. I don't know. She met his gaze. When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never imagined feeling. Feeling what? He prompted gently. Possibility, she whispered. You make me feel like there might be a future worth hoping for. Caleb's expression softened. There is, I promise you that. The week of bed rest brought unexpected intimacy. Caleb took over the household duties without complaint, bringing Nora meals, reading to her from one of the few books they owned, and keeping her company in the evenings. They talked for hours, filling in the gaps of their knowledge about each other, discovering shared values and complementary differences. By the time Mrs. Johnson declared Nora fit to resume light activities, something fundamental had changed between them. The theoretical arrangement had begun to feel like something real, something with roots that might grow deep. December arrived with bitter cold. Caleb insulated the cabin and kept the woodpile stocked. Nora's due date approached, bringing both anticipation and anxiety. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Nora broached a subject that had been on her mind. We should discuss names, she said, rubbing her rounded belly. For the baby, Caleb looked up from the leather he was working. Have you thought of any? If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after Thomas. She watched Caleb carefully for his reaction. His expression remained thoughtful. That seems right. He's Thomas's son. His acceptance touched her. And if it's a girl, what about Emily? Caleb suggested quietly. Nora's eyes widened. After your wife, only if you're comfortable with it. I just thought. He shrugged, suddenly uncertain, that our past should be honored, not forgotten, Nora finished for him. I think that's beautiful, Caleb. They shared a smile, the moment tender with understanding. Later that night, as Caleb prepared to return to the bunkhouse, Nora made a decision. It's too cold for you out there, she said. You should sleep by the fire in here. Are you sure? Yes, she said firmly. It's practical, nothing more. But as the days passed and Caleb continued to sleep on a pallet by the fire, Nora found herself watching him in the firelight, studying the strong lines of his face relaxed in sleep. The nothing more had become something else entirely, though she wasn't ready to name it. 2 weeks before Christmas, a blizzard descended upon the territory. The wind howled around the cabin, snow piling against the walls. Caleb had prepared well. They had ample food, water, and firewood, but the ferocity of the storm was unsettling. On the second night, as they huddled near the fire, Nora felt the first true contraction. She gasped, recognizing immediately that this was different from the false labor. Caleb, she said, her voice tight with pain. It's time. His face paled. Now, but Mrs. Johnson won't be able to get here in this storm. Another contraction gripped her and she breathed through it. It's just us. Determination replaced his momentary panic. Tell me what to do, boil water, gather clean linens. Nora tried to remember everything her mother had told her about childbirth. And pray, Caleb, pray hard. The next hours were the most difficult of Nora's life. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined, each contraction more intense than the last. Caleb stayed by her side, supporting her, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. You can do this, he said as she gripped his hand with crushing force. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. I can't, she sobbed as another contraction tore through her. It hurts too much. You can, he insisted, and you're not alone. I'm right here. I won't leave you. His steady presence anchored her through the worst of the pain. When it came time to push, he positioned himself to catch the baby, his hands steady despite his fear. I see the head, he exclaimed. Nora, you're doing it. Keep pushing. With a final, tremendous effort, Nora felt the baby slide from her body. There was a moment of terrible silence, then a lusty cry filled the cabin. A boy, Caleb announced, his voice thick with emotion. A perfect baby boy. He wrapped the infant in clean linens and placed him on Nora's chest. She looked down at her son Thomas's son and felt overwhelming love. Hello, little Thomas, she whispered. The baby's cries quieted as he nestled against her. Caleb sat beside them, his eyes wet with tears. He's beautiful, Nora, she reached for his hand. Thank you, I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have, he said with certainty, but I'm glad you didn't have to. The blizzard continued for 3 more days. During that time, Caleb cared for both Nora and baby Thomas with tender devotion. He changed diapers, helped Nora with nursing, and kept the fire burning constantly to ward off the bitter cold. On Christmas Eve, the storm finally broke. Stars glittered in the clear sky, and moonlight reflected off the snow-covered landscape. Nora sat in the rocking chair, Thomas sleeping in her arms, while Caleb added wood to the fire. I have something for you, he said, retrieving a small package from his coat pocket. It's not much, but... Nora accepted the gift, carefully shifting Thomas to free one hand. Inside the simple wrapping was a carved wooden locket on a leather cord. When she opened it, she found a tiny lock of Thomas's downy hair secured inside. Caleb, she breathed, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. I thought you might want to keep him close to your heart, even when he's grown. He looked uncertain. Do you like it? It's perfect. Tears filled her eyes. I don't have anything for you. You've given me more than enough, he said, glancing at the sleeping baby. A family, a purpose. Nora studied his face in the firelight. Over the past months, she'd come to know this man, his strength, his gentleness, his unwavering commitment. Without planning to, she'd come to depend on him, to trust him to. Caleb, she said softly, I think I'm ready. He looked confused. Ready. For our arrangement to be real. She met his gaze steadily. For us to be husband and wife in truth, not just in name. Hope and happiness dawned in his eyes. Are you certain? I am, she smiled. I think I've been falling in love with you since that first day on the porch. I just wasn't ready to admit it. Caleb knelt beside the rocking chair, taking her free hand in his. Nora Miller, I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing in that doorway, proud and fierce despite your fear. He pressed a kiss to her palm. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you and this boy. You already are, she whispered. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise of deeper connection to come. When they parted, baby Thomas stirred and opened his eyes, regarding them solemnly. Look at that, Caleb said with wonder. He approves. Nora laughed, happiness bubbling up inside her. Of course he does. He knows a good father when he sees one. They were married by a traveling preacher in January, with baby Thomas cradled in Mrs. Johnson's arms as they spoke their vows. The small cabin was crowded with neighbors who had come to witness the union and welcome the newest member of their community. Winter gave way to spring, and with the thaw came new growth on the homestead. Caleb expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for Thomas and space for the family they both hoped would grow. Nora planted a larger garden, her confidence bolstered by Caleb's unwavering support. On a warm evening in June, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Thomas sleeping peacefully in Caleb's arms. The baby had his father's dark hair, his biological father's, but Caleb's patient nature seemed to have influenced him already. "Do you ever regret it?" Nora asked suddenly. "Taking on another man's wife and child," Caleb looked at her with surprise. "Never, not for a single moment. Even when he cries all night and the cattle break through the fence and everything seems to go wrong at once," he smiled, shifting Thomas to his shoulder. "Even then, especially then." He reached for her hand. "That day I rode up to your porch, I was looking for a purpose. What I found was so much more. I found home, Nora. I found love." "As did I," she said, leaning against him, "though I certainly wasn't looking for it." Sometimes the best things find us when we least expect them. They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared. Thomas stirred and made a small sound, and Caleb instinctively patted his back, soothing him back to sleep. "You're a natural father," Nora observed. "He makes it easy." "He's a good boy. He has a good example to follow." Caleb kissed her temple. "I keep thinking about what you said that first day, that I was a stranger proposing to a woman I'd never met." "You were," she confirmed with a laugh. "Not anymore, though." "No," she agreed, warmth filling her heart. "Now you're the man who kept his promise, the man who loves me and our son. Always will," he vowed. "That's one promise I'll never break." As darkness settled over the Wyoming prairie, Nora Walker counted her blessings. She had known great loss, but also remarkable love. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and hope. Looking at her husband cradling their son, she knew that the words spoken on her porch that fateful day had led to something true and lasting. A new family had been forged out of grief and chance, stronger for the challenges they had overcome together. And in the years to come, as their family grew and the homestead prospered, Nora and Caleb would often look back on that moment when a dusty cowboy made an unexpected offer to a pregnant widow, as the beginning of their greatest adventure. 5 years passed, transforming the modest homestead into a thriving ranch. Caleb's knowledge of cattle had proved invaluable as they gradually built a respectable herd. The single field of crops had expanded to feed not only their family, but to sell in the growing town 15 miles east. Young Thomas, now 5 years old, had been joined by a 3-year-old sister, Charlotte, whose arrival had nearly cost Nora her life. The difficult birth had left them unable to have more children, but their family felt complete nonetheless. Thomas had Caleb's steady demeanor with flashes of his birth father's dreaming nature, while Charlotte was all fire and determination, racing after her brother on sturdy legs. On a bright September morning, Nora stood at the kitchen window watching Caleb teach Thomas to ride his first pony. The boy sat straight-backed and serious in the small saddle, listening intently to Caleb's instructions. Charlotte stood at the fence, loudly protesting her exclusion from the lesson. My turn," she insisted, her dark braids bouncing as she jumped up and down. "When you're older, Charlie," Caleb called, using the nickname that had stuck despite Nora's initial protests. "I'm big now," Charlotte demonstrated by stretching to her full height. Nora smiled, recognizing her own stubbornness in her daughter. She stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Charlotte Walker, leave your father to his teaching. Come help me with the biscuits." The girl turned, considering whether biscuit making was an acceptable alternative to pony riding. "Can I use the rolling pin?" "You may," Nora confirmed, and Charlotte raced to the porch, crisis averted. As they worked in the kitchen, Nora stole glances through the window, her heart full at the sight of Caleb's patient guidance. Thomas worshipped his father, following him everywhere, imitating his walk, his speech, his mannerisms. There were times Nora caught herself wondering if Thomas remembered, somewhere deep in his consciousness, that Caleb wasn't his blood father. But if such awareness existed, it made no difference in the fierce love between them. Later that afternoon, as Charlotte napped and Thomas helped Caleb in the barn, Nora walked to the small, fenced plot behind the house. There, two grave markers stood side by side, one for Thomas Miller, the other a memorial for Emily Walker, whose body rested hundreds of miles away in Texas. Nora had suggested the memorial shortly after their marriage, believing that acknowledging their pasts would strengthen their future. She knelt to clear away weeds and place wildflowers at the base of each marker. "The children are growing so fast," she said softly, a habit she'd developed over the years. "Thomas is becoming quite the horseman. He has your eye for good stock," she told her first husband's grave. To Emily's marker she added, "Charlotte has decided she wants to be a doctor." Announced it at breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Talking to our ghosts again." Caleb's voice came gently from behind her. Nora stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, just keeping them updated. He wrapped an arm around her waist. "They'd be proud of what we've built." "I think so too." She leaned into his embrace. "Where are the children?" "Thomas is mucking stalls, insists on doing it himself. Charlotte's still sleeping." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Gives us a rare moment alone." "Indeed it does, Mr. Walker." She turned in his arms. "Whatever shall we do with it?" His eyes darkened with familiar desire. "I have a few ideas, Mrs. Walker." Their lovemaking had only deepened with the years, comfort and knowledge of each other's bodies enhancing rather than diminishing their passion. They slipped into their bedroom, door firmly closed, and lost themselves in each other until Charlotte's voice called for her mama. As they straightened their clothes, Caleb caught Nora's hand. "I've been meaning to ask you something." "Yes." The cattle buyer from Cheyenne mentioned they're looking for stock for drives north to the railroad. "Offered a good price if we can deliver 50 head by next month." Nora considered this. "That would mean a week's journey at least. 10 days, most likely." He hesitated. "I thought maybe Thomas could come with me." "He's only 5, Caleb, nearly 6, and it would be good for him to see more of the territory, learn the business side of ranching." His expression grew earnest. "I'll keep him safe, Nora. You know I would never let anything happen to him." She knew the real reason behind the request. Caleb wanted Thomas to experience something of his own childhood, the open range, the camaraderie of cowboys, the pride of completing a difficult job. It was an initiation of sorts, a father-son journey. "Charlotte will be impossible to live with if her brother gets an adventure and she doesn't," Nora warned. Caleb grinned. "I'll bring her back something special from Cheyenne, maybe a book on doctoring," Nora laughed. "You spoil her. Someone has to balance out your strict discipline." He grew serious again. "So Thomas can come?" "Yes," she agreed. "But you bring him back in one piece, Caleb Walker, or you'll answer to me." "Yes, madam." He sealed the promise with a kiss. The preparations for the cattle drive consumed the next 2 weeks. Thomas could barely contain his excitement. Strutting around in the new hat Caleb had bought him and practicing his rope skills on the fence posts. Charlotte alternated between sulking and extracting increasingly elaborate promises of gifts from her father. The night before departure, after the children were asleep, Nora and Caleb sat on the porch in the quiet darkness. The vastness of the Wyoming sky stretched above them, stars scattered like diamond dust across the blackness. "I've never been away from him," Nora said softly. "Not for more than a day." Caleb took her hand. "It's not too late to change your mind." No, he needs this, needs time with just you. She squeezed his fingers. I just worry. That's what mothers do. He brought her hand to his lips. We'll be careful. The trail's well established, and I've hired good men to help with the herd. I know. She rested her head on his shoulder. Promise you'll both come back to me. Wild horses couldn't keep us away. He turned to face her. You're the heart of this family, Nora, the reason for everything. As you are mine, she whispered, still sometimes amazed by the depth of her love for this man who had appeared on her porch when she needed him most. Morning came with a flurry of last-minute preparations. Nora packed food for the journey, double-checking Thomas's small bedroll and spare clothes. Charlotte clung to her brother, suddenly bereft at the thought of his absence. You bring back a story every night, she commanded him seriously. So when you come home, you can tell me all of them. I will, Thomas promised, puffing up with importance at his new role as family chronicler. Caleb lifted his son onto the small pony they'd been training. Remember what I taught you. Stay with the horse, listen to my instructions, and never wander off alone. Yes, sir, Thomas replied, his expression solemn with responsibility. Nora hugged Caleb tightly. Take care of our boy. With my life, he promised, then kissed her goodbye. She stood with Charlotte in the yard, waving until the small party disappeared over the ridge. The cattle moved slowly, guided by Caleb, Thomas, and the 3 hired hands. Will they really come back, Mama? Charlotte asked, her earlier bravado fading. Of course they will, sweetheart. Nora lifted her daughter into her arms, though Charlotte was getting almost too big for such treatment. And until then, you and I will have our own adventures. The days stretched into a week, then 10 days as expected. Nora kept busy with Charlotte and the ranch work, but nights were lonely without Caleb's solid warmth beside her. She found herself listening for hoofbeats each evening, though she knew it was too soon for their return. On the 12th day, as Nora hung laundry while Charlotte helped by tangling the clean sheets, the sound of approaching riders reached them. Charlotte dropped her corner of the sheet immediately. Papa, Thomas, she raced toward the ridge. Nora's heart leapt, but caution made her call, Charlotte, wait for me. They watched together as the riders came into view. Caleb led the way, Thomas riding proudly beside him. Even from a distance, Nora could see the change in her son, a new confidence in his posture, a maturity beyond his years. Charlotte couldn't contain herself. She broke free from Nora's grasp and ran toward the approaching horses. Caleb swung down from his saddle and caught her mid-run, tossing her into the air as she squealed with delight. Nora walked more sedately, though her heart raced. Thomas dismounted carefully, handling his pony with newfound expertise. Mama, he called, running to her once his horse was secured. We sold all the cattle, and I helped drive them right through the middle of Cheyenne. She hugged him tightly, noting the faint sunburn across his nose and the distinct odor of campfire smoke in his clothes. Were you brave? So brave, Caleb confirmed, approaching with Charlotte perched on his hip. Best young cowhand I've ever seen. Did you bring me presents? Charlotte demanded, getting straight to the important matters. Caleb laughed. Yes, Miss Charlotte, in my saddlebag, but first, I need to properly greet your mother. He set Charlotte down and reached for Nora, drawing her into a kiss that spoke volumes about how much he'd missed her. She melted against him, relief and love overwhelming her. Welcome home, she whispered against his lips. Best part of leaving, he replied, is coming back to you. That evening, after Thomas had recounted every detail of the journey, and Charlotte had exclaimed over her gifts, a small doctor's bag with candy pills, and a book on plants and their medicinal uses, the children fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted by excitement. Nora and Caleb retreated to their bedroom, their reunion tender and passionate. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Caleb propped himself on one elbow to look at her. I have something to tell you, he said, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Nora's stomach tightened with sudden anxiety. What is it? The cattle buyer was impressed with our stock, offered me a partnership in his operation. He paused. It would mean more money, Nora, security for the children's future. But, she prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. But it would mean spending more time in Cheyenne, maybe eventually moving there. Nora sat up, pulling the sheet around her. Leave the ranch, our home, Not right away, maybe not ever if you don't want to. He touched her face gently. I told him I needed to discuss it with my wife. That no decision about our future happens without your agreement. The respect in his voice calmed her initial panic. What do you want, Caleb? He considered the question seriously. I want our children to have opportunities we didn't have, education, options beyond this land. He gestured to the window where the vast Wyoming wilderness stretched beyond. But I also want them to know this life, to understand where they come from. And us, what do you want for us? His eyes softened. For us to grow old together wherever we are, the place doesn't matter, Nora. Home is where you are. She thought about the small graves behind the house, the memories embedded in the walls of their cabin, the life they'd built from almost nothing. But she also thought about the children's futures, the advantages a more settled area might provide. I don't need to decide tonight, do I? She asked. No. He pulled her back into his arms. We have time. I just wanted you to know all the possibilities that lie before us. Nora nestled against him, comforted by his solid presence and the knowledge that whatever they decided, they would decide together. I missed you, she murmured, sleep beginning to claim her, and I you, he whispered back. Every moment. The decision about the cattle buyer's offer wasn't made quickly. Through the winter, Caleb and Nora discussed possibilities, weighing the benefits of greater prosperity against the comfort of their established life. By spring, they had reached a compromise. Caleb would accept a modified partnership that allowed him to remain based at their ranch while making occasional trips to Cheyenne. The arrangement proved successful beyond their expectations. Within 2 years, their operation had expanded significantly. They hired more hands, built a larger house with proper bedrooms for each child, and even added a small schoolhouse where a teacher came 3 days a week to instruct Thomas, Charlotte, and the children from neighboring ranches. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons and growth. Thomas, now 8, was Caleb's shadow, absorbing everything about ranching with quiet intensity. Charlotte, 6 and fiercely intelligent, divided her time between helping Nora with household tasks and doctoring every injured animal she could find. On a warm autumn evening in 1886, as Nora prepared dinner, a rider appeared on the horizon. Visitors weren't unusual now. Their ranch had become something of a gathering place for the scattered community, but something about this rider's approach caught her attention. Caleb stepped onto the porch beside her, wiping his hands on a rag. Expecting someone? No. She shaded her eyes against the setting sun, riding hard whoever it is. As the figure drew closer, Caleb stiffened. Stay here, he said, his voice suddenly tight. He stepped off the porch, hand instinctively moving to the pistol he still wore when working the ranch. The rider pulled up in a cloud of dust, horse heaving from exertion. It was a woman, Nora realized with surprise, a young woman with tangled blonde hair and a desperate expression. Caleb Walker. She called, not dismounting. That's me, Caleb confirmed cautiously. Thank God. The woman slumped with relief. I've been searching for weeks. I'm Abigail Carson. My sister was Emily Walker. Nora felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She moved to stand beside Caleb, whose face had drained of color. Emily had no sister, he said flatly. Half-sister, the woman corrected. Different fathers. I was just 12 when she married you, living with my father in Kansas. Her eyes flickered to Nora, then back to Caleb. I wouldn't have sought you out, but there's something you need to know. Whatever it is can be said in front of my wife, Caleb stated, reaching for Nora's hand. Abigail nodded. Of course. She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. Emily's child lived, Mr. Walker. Your son survived the birth. The words hung in the air like thunderclaps. Nora felt Caleb's hand tighten convulsively around hers. That's not possible, he finally managed. I was told they both died. The doctor thought he would. He was early weak, but he survived. Abigail's voice broke. Emily had already been buried when he started to improve. My father took him in, raised him as his grandson, for 5 years, without telling me. Anger edged into Caleb's voice. My father hated you for leaving Emily alone, blamed you for her death. Abigail looked down. It wasn't right, I know that, but he was determined. And now, Nora asked, finding her voice at last, My father died last spring. I've been caring for the boy Christopher, but I'm to be married soon. My fiancé is taking me to Oregon. Abigail met Caleb's eyes directly. Christopher deserves to know his father. Caleb was silent for so long that Nora feared he might not speak at all. When he did, his voice was rough with emotion. Where is he now? At the hotel in town, with the woman who runs it. Abigail shifted uncomfortably. I told him I was finding his papa. He's excited but scared too. Bring him here, Nora said, surprising herself and Caleb. Tomorrow he should meet his family properly. Abigail's relief was palpable. Thank you, Mrs. Walker. I'll bring him in the morning. She hesitated. He's a good boy. Quiet but strong. After she had ridden away, Caleb stood frozen, staring after her. Nora touched his arm gently. Caleb, he turned to her, his eyes filled with conflicting emotions. Nora, I don't know what to say, what to think. I know. She led him to the porch steps and sat beside him. It's overwhelming. A son, he whispered. Emily's son, our son. He looked at her with sudden fear. What will this mean for us, for Thomas and Charlotte? It means our family is larger than we thought. She took his hands in hers. It means a boy who has lost his mother and grandfather will know his father. You would accept him, just like that. Nora thought of the day Caleb had appeared on her porch, offering to be a father to Thomas. How could I do anything else? You taught me what true fatherhood means, Caleb. What true love means. He pulled her into a fierce embrace. I don't deserve you. Perhaps not, she teased gently, but you're stuck with me nonetheless. They stayed on the porch until darkness fell, discussing how to tell the children, how to make room in their lives and hearts for this unexpected addition. When they finally went inside, they gathered Thomas and Charlotte in the sitting room. We have something important to tell you, Caleb began, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. He explained in terms the children could understand about his first wife and the baby he thought had died. About how sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt children and how a boy named Christopher would be coming to meet them tomorrow. Is he my brother? Thomas asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. He's your father's son, Nora explained carefully, which makes him your brother in a way, yes. Like how you're my father but not by blood, Thomas said to Caleb with the directness of childhood. Caleb nodded, swallowing hard. That's right, son. Will he live with us? Charlotte wanted to know. We hope so eventually, Nora answered. But it might take time for him to feel comfortable here. I'll share my room, Thomas offered immediately, and my pony. Me too, Charlotte added, not to be outdone in generosity, except I don't have a pony, but I'll share my books. Caleb looked at Nora, gratitude and love shining in his eyes. We have remarkable children, he said softly. We do indeed, she agreed. All of them. The night passed slowly, sleep elusive for both Nora and Caleb. They spoke in whispers of practical matters where Christopher would sleep, what adjustments would be needed, but beneath the planning ran deeper currents of emotion. Are you truly all right with this? Caleb asked as dawn approached. It changes everything. It changes nothing that matters, Nora replied, tracing the line of his jaw. Our love, our family, those remain constant. We're just making room for one more. When morning came, they prepared the house with unusual care. Nora baked Christopher's favorite cookies, or what she imagined might be a 5-year-old boy's favorites, while Caleb paced nervously. Thomas and Charlotte dressed in their Sunday best without complaint, understanding somehow the significance of the day. The sound of an approaching wagon brought them all to the porch. Abigail drove, with a small figure beside her barely visible from a distance. As they drew closer, Nora felt Caleb tense beside her. The boy who climbed carefully down from the wagon had Emily's blonde hair and fair complexion, but his eyes, those were unmistakably Caleb's, dark and serious. He stood half hidden behind Abigail's skirts, peering up at the assembled family. Caleb stepped forward slowly, then knelt to the boy's level. Hello, Christopher, he said, his voice gentle. I'm your father. The boy studied him solemnly. Aunt Abby said you didn't know about me. That's right. If I had known, I would have come for you right away. Christopher considered this, then asked with heartbreaking directness, Are you going to send me away too? No, Caleb said firmly. Never, this is your home now if you want it to be. The boy looked past him to Nora and the children. Are they my family too? Nora stepped forward, smiling warmly. We would like to be. I'm Nora. These are Thomas and Charlotte. Thomas, displaying wisdom beyond his years, approached Christopher with a friendly grin. Want to see the new foal? It was born yesterday. Christopher's eyes lit with interest. He looked to Abigail, who nodded encouragingly. Go ahead, I'll be here when you get back. The two boys headed toward the barn, Charlotte trailing after them, already chattering about the foal's markings. Nora, Caleb, and Abigail watched them go, the adults sharing a moment of silent relief at the children's easy acceptance. He has few possessions, Abigail said, gesturing to a small trunk in the wagon. Some clothes, a wooden horse my father carved for him, a book of fables Emily used to read. Thank you for bringing him to us, Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion, and for caring for him all this time. Abigail nodded, tears in her eyes. I promised Emily I'd look after her baby, now I'm passing that promise to you. She hesitated. I'd like to write to him if that's all right. Let him know he still has an aunt who cares. Of course, Nora assured her. He'll need those connections. They invited Abigail to stay for lunch, during which Christopher gradually emerged from his shell, especially in response to Thomas's friendly overtures. By afternoon, when it was time for Abigail to return to town, the boy seemed torn between excitement about his new surroundings and fear of losing his aunt. I'll write to you, Abigail promised, kneeling to hug him. And you'll be so busy with your new family and all these animals, you'll hardly miss me. Will you visit before you go to Oregon? Christopher asked, his lower lip trembling slightly. I promise. She kissed his forehead, then whispered something in his ear that made him nod seriously. As her wagon disappeared down the road, Christopher stood between Caleb and Nora, his small hands held tightly in theirs. Nora felt the tremor that ran through him and squeezed his fingers reassuringly. It's a lot to take in, she said gently. Would you like to see your room? Thomas has been working hard to make space for you. Christopher nodded, still solemn. As they walked toward the house, he looked up at Caleb. Aunt Abby said my mama loved you very much. Caleb swallowed hard. She did, and I loved her too. She died when I was born. Yes. Caleb knelt again to look Christopher in the eye. But that wasn't your fault. Sometimes sad things happen that no one can prevent. The boy seemed to accept this. Aunt Abby said you have a new wife now. Yes, this is Nora. She's very special to me. Christopher turned his serious gaze to Nora. Will you be my mother now? The direct question caught Nora by surprise, but she answered from her heart. I would be honored to be your mother, Christopher, but I know I'm not the mother who gave birth to you. We can keep her memory alive together if you'd like. He considered this, then nodded. Grandfather didn't like to talk about her, but I want to know. Then we will talk about her, Caleb promised, and I'll tell you all the things I remember. The integration of Christopher into their family wasn't without challenges. Nightmares plagued him initially, and he sometimes retreated into silence when overwhelmed. But the steady love of his new family gradually worked its healing magic. Thomas, especially, took his role as big brother seriously, including Christopher in his activities and fiercely defending him when needed. By Christmas, 4 months after his arrival, Christopher had claimed his place in the Walker family. His laughter joined the chorus of children's voices that filled the ranch house, and he followed Caleb with the same devotion Thomas did, soaking up fatherly attention like parched earth absorbs rain. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside, the family gathered around the fire. Gifts had been exchanged, simple, handmade items mostly, with special store-bought treasures for each child. Christopher sat examining the small carved horse Caleb had made for him, a companion to the one his grandfather had created years before. It looks like thunder, he said, referring to the gentle pony he'd begun riding lessons on. That was the idea, Caleb confirmed, his arm around Nora on the sofa. Charlotte was already absorbed in her new book, while Thomas arranged the wooden farm set he'd received. The peaceful scene brought tears to Nora's eyes. This family that had been formed not by birth alone, but by choice and love and circumstances that could have broken them, but instead had made them stronger. Later, after the children were asleep, Caleb and Nora stood by their bedroom window, watching the snow blanket their land in pristine white. "I never imagined this life," Caleb said softly. "When I rode up to your porch that day, I was just a lonely man offering what little I had. And I was a frightened widow too proud to admit I needed help." Nora leaned against him. "Look what we've built together." "A miracle," he murmured, pressing his lips to her temple. "3 miracles," she corrected, thinking of their children sleeping peacefully down the hall. Caleb turned her to face him, his expression serious. "Thank you, Nora, for accepting Christopher, for making room in your heart, as you did for Thomas," she reminded him. "We're even now, I think," he smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with happiness. "Not even close. I'm still the fortunate one in this arrangement. Perhaps we can agree to disagree on that point." She wrapped her arms around his neck. "Or perhaps we're both fortunate beyond measure." "That," he said, drawing her closer, "is something we can definitely agree on." As they sealed the sentiment with a kiss, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate moment on her porch when a stranger had offered an outrageous proposal, to this moment of complete fulfillment, it had been a path neither of them could have foreseen, yet one she wouldn't trade for any other. "I love you, Caleb Walker," she whispered against his lips. "Now and always." "And I love you," he replied, the words as true and steady as the man himself, "for all my days and beyond." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the vast Wyoming landscape in a blanket of possibilities. Inside, a family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, bound not by blood alone, but by the stronger ties of chosen love.